Welcome to A Case for America. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth. And today we are talking about the 26th Amendment. It's a pretty simple amendment, but I do think there are some interesting issues to talk about surrounding it that perhaps, again, society is still working on resolving. But the 26th Amendment states, the right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. And so this essentially set the minimum voting age across the nation at 18 years old. So here on A Case for America, we like to talk about the proper balance, to say there is a balance. Freedom is somewhere, the state of liberty or freedom is somewhere between anarchy and tyranny, anarchy being a state of no law and tyranny being a state of too much law. And so at this time in the United States, we had things like the Vietnam War going on, and there was a draft for that. The Vietnam War they were drafting people at the age of 18, but in some states, these people couldn't vote until they were 21 because the states were setting the voting age. So Congress actually passed a law that said, hey, everyone across the nation, states, localities, you have to let 18-year-olds vote. There was kind of a phrase that had come up, something like old enough to vote, old enough to fight, old enough to vote. And ultimately that law was challenged. It was ruled as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, saying that Congress didn't have the power to tell states what criteria to set for voting. And so after that, again, in light of the Vietnam War, and there was a stronger discussion in America prior to the Vietnam War, even if 21 was the right age to vote, or if 18, or what age that would be. But this amendment passed and made it so that Congress could, by law, set minimum ages. And so this amendment technically still allows states to have a lower voting age than 18 if they want to. But we've kind of set this mark at 18 in America, and we've stuck to it for a while, except that we haven't. It's a very common thing we look at. And so today we wanted to talk a little bit about a few of the issues that are connected to this 18 years, and maybe some of the things that it implies. And so, for example, one of the places that 18 has not caught on fully is in buying tobacco or buying alcohol. And those often require that you're 21 to be able to purchase those. And again, that used to be the voting age. And we decided still as a country that you can't purchase those products until you're 21. And I have always been curious about the moral justification to say, yeah, you got to wait till you're 21 to do that. You can go vote if you want to, though, and get a legislative rep to change those laws. But you can't, unless you can get someone to change those laws, you can't purchase those products right now. And to me, the issue when we talk about age, it dives in. There's a couple things that it dives into. One is, when do we become legally responsible as people? We have 16-year-olds that can drive in many states, even starting at 15 in quite a few states. But we're told that we can't enter into a contract till we're 18 because that's the legal age of majority. Does a 17-year-old really have a lot of difference from an 18-year-old in their ability to read a contract, understand it, decide if they want to be bound by it? We say things like that. Say, yeah, you can't enter into a contract, but you can have a cell phone. We'll give you a cell phone. And technically you're signing an agreement with your carrier. And hey, by the way, federal law says, once you're 13, you can kind of have your own online accounts. And so Google, if you have family controls in place on your kids, when they reach the age of 13 online, Google sends them an email and says, hey, child, just so you know, you're under your family's account. You can opt out now that you're 13. You don't have to be under their account anymore. And the child can choose to opt out and have their own account free from parental control at 13. we have criminal laws that say generally if a child is a teenager, they're going to be held in juvenile court. But if they do something really bad, we might try them as an adult because we want to keep them in jail longer. Um, and and so to me, society is still wrestling with what does it really mean to be an adult? What does it really mean to be responsible? And we've kind of selected varying degrees of it and say you can be responsible for some things, but not everything until, well, even I was going to say until 21, but now you can stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26. I don't know where the age 26 came from, but we kind of kicked it out there with the Obamacare items that extended the kids' rights to stay on insurance. And so, Michael, curious to know any of your initial thoughts on age, maybe whether it's appropriate, not appropriate. At what point should we become responsible for our own selves?
Yeah, it is interesting to try to decide that. It seems arbitrary sometimes when we pick ages. Maybe another example is taxes. So there was this idea in the founding of America when we talked about like the Boston Tea Party, no taxation without representation. Before you can vote, you can be taxed if you have a job, and anytime if you had a job and you made some money and then you went and bought something, you'd pay sales tax. So you can be taxed long before you can vote. And so there's other issues like that where we just can't seem to figure out what it actually means to be responsible. I think we look at the age of 18 and say, well, they're an adult, they should be able to vote. We've talked about previously, especially last week, about the responsibility we have to learn and kind of get acquainted with the issues and with the candidates that are running for office. And we we just tell people to vote without asking them to do things like that. Even in our public schools, we don't do a great job anymore of teaching government, even just like from a mechanical perspective. How does the government function? And so people go into these things pretty ignorant of perhaps what to expect, what you know, they're just kind of looking at it from the perspective of an 18-year-old, which their life is maybe not reflective of what an adult life will be as they grow up. And so, what kind of experience do they have? What kind of knowledge do they have? Is there an age that we can set? It's a difficult question to answer, like person by person. I can see why you might try to pick an age, but I think it would be helpful if we could pick an age across the board on all these different issues. We say somebody is responsible enough to vote, that person should probably be responsible enough to um, do anything else that we would consider for an adult. I think you should be, if you're voting, you should be an adult, and then you should be responsible enough for whatever else comes with that. Be it not on your parents' insurance, be it buying alcohol or tobacco or something. I think all those things should line up so that we present a clear, consistent picture of what we expect accountability wise from an individual. If you're voting, you're accountable. You're accountable for your vote. It's an important responsibility. It's not just a right that we like to throw around. And so it should be taken seriously. And if we can align all those things, I think it'll help people to take it seriously. You're old enough to do all these things. You're old enough to vote. It's just as serious as all these other things that you could perhaps be accountable for.
Yeah, and it's it is it is interesting to me. You mentioned have a clear line for when we're an adult and responsible, and um, it does make me wonder: are there pieces we start to give, kind of like driving, to say, okay, you can drive. Um, you're not a full adult yet, but you can drive, and um, and then I do estate planning, and so this is kind of continuing that thought. It's a little bit of a tangent, but we'll come back to that. The For a long time, people would choose to give things to their grandkids when they turned 18. That is moving back to where many people that I work with choose not to give it to their grandkids till the grandkids turn 25. And they feel that this generation's not as mature as previous generations. Now, maybe it's a perception thing. Maybe there's reality to it. I don't know. But it goes back to this thing of, well, how do we help someone become an adult? Or do you start to give them certain pieces at a time and then let them, delay full adulthood or responsibility? Um, but when I look at voting, again, I think, yeah, it's a pretty big deal to tell someone they can be drafted without the ability to vote on it. But like you say, well, kids can be taxed without the ability to vote on it. Maybe it's not a big deal for today's generation. Um, but I remember I filed my first tax return, I think, at age 13. And I didn't have any say in what the government was doing. And we passed laws that regulate children. So a lot of these states are passing laws to ban social media where they propose them. And kids are being impacted by that. And they aren't allowed to vote on the issues or even for the representatives that are voting on the issues. And so I do think it is good for you to know, well, what do we do there? And, there's criminal laws that say, oh, they're 16, so they're juvenile unless we opt to charge them as an adult. And so we're in this window of, yeah, there's some kids that are pretty bad and they should be tried as an adult, which means they should just have more punishment. But to me, that starts to send kind of a mixed message of, well, we'll just treat you like a kid unless we don't think you're a kid or we think you did something too bad. It's not super predictable. To me, that's not very in line with due process, which says you need to be able to know what you're being charged at and what's happening. But again, maybe it's not a huge issue. Maybe in America, we just say, if you do something really bad as a kid, you should know that something really bad will come for you, kind of thing. But I personally don't believe that kids do understand that. I don't believe the kids grasp how all these things work, to your point of we don't educate on these issues. It is, yeah, it's just concerning. Is there any real rhyme or reason to our law? Should there be? And I think your point was, yeah, there should be rhyme or reason to our law. We should have the ability to set a principle and go with it and explain why when you're 18 or 21, we've taught you some things. You have some knowledge. Now you got to take this responsibility for yourself.
And not to say this is the direction we should go, but originally for voting in America, it was the landowners. And there's some controversy about that. But when I look at it, I personally think it was kind of an attempt by the founding fathers to say who are the responsible and participating members of the community. we need them to be involved in the governmental process. And I'm not trying to say it should be landowners again, but it would be interesting to look and say, is there some sort of aspect of what we do in society today we can say, look, here are the responsible participating members of society, and outside of that, you're not doing anything that would show us that you're a responsible individual, that you're paying attention, that you're doing any kind of work. And this isn't to say that we should not let lots of people vote and really limit it down. But it'd be interesting to see if we could create some sort of standard and say, take a look at this. If you're doing these kinds of things, then you'd be able to vote. It's kind of a show us what kind of person you are as far as responsibility in society goes. And then if you could set that and then see how many people would rise up to meet it. I think individuals that are very concerned and want to be a part would step up and be responsible and vote. Again, this is just kind of spitballing here. I don't know what that test would be or what it looks like, but I think it's interesting to discuss when we look at society. Where do we think the individuals are? What are they doing? Those that are concerned about governmental processes, who are paying attention, who understand, and not just showing up and looking at a name and picking it. I don't know that does us much of any good at any point in time. If we need to elect representatives that represent our values, and then we just go pick a name, we're not representing our values. So it's kind of an interesting discussion. How could we figure out, is it an age or is it a based on how you've been living and the things that you've been doing?
Yeah, and it's, some people will say, "Whoa, you're this discussion is going to disenfranchise certain groups of people. And I'd say yes and no, and that yes, that discussion, the point you're making, would disenfranchise people who aren't informed or who aren't participating. And we've had things, in the past, poll taxes and literacy tests and things that were mainly geared at trying to take away the voting rights of certain groups. And so one of the problems that America has had in its past of putting a standard in place is that you can pick a standard that works for a certain group really well, but not for the other group really well. And constitutionally, we don't want to be, found to be discriminatory. But so I think that's one reason why America has moved away from it pretty strongly, is just to say, anyone can vote. But in the same vein, when anyone can vote and you say, hey, college kids, do you want student loans forgiven? Do you want free college? Yeah. And then it does get to this thing of, well, what are we doing to ourselves as a nation if anyone can vote? But in the same vein, it's not just college students, because the government says, oh, you want COVID funds? Okay, vote for me. Oh, you want tax cuts? Vote for me. Oh, you want... And there's so many things that we as a people vote for and we support, even though it's not necessarily good for us or good politically, just because there's some kind of benefit to us. And are we really that much different from a teenager? In some ways, I hope we are, but I don't fully know that we are in all things. And again, just on this notion, it's to really ask the question: if we have a right to vote, what's the attendant responsibility? And can we put some words around what that responsibility is without it being racist, without it being sexist, without it cutting out groups? It's just purely to say, this is what a country needs in order to be strong.
And I think that clarifies a lot, because if you're setting a standard, you have to be willing to live with that standard, whether the people who live up to it support your ideals or your opponent's ideals. So if you're saying this is what a responsible individual looks like, somebody who are going to allow to vote, you have to be able to say they're going to vote whatever way they feel is necessary. So if they're just, as you mentioned earlier, if they're just voting to get the tax cuts they want, you live with that. If they're a participating member of society up to the standard that we set, you have to allow that for everybody who's lived up to that. So it's, back to the poll taxes and other things. It's not that we're trying to prohibit a certain group that thinks differently than us. It's more that, how do we define what a participating member of society is, and at what level can they and should they be responsible? It may be an age. That may be what it came down to, and that's why we're back to an age. And maybe we just need to consolidate around what that age is for most things we look at. But it's an interesting topic to discuss, of if it's just an age and you can just show up and vote without participating, you're living off of your everybody else. Like, you're not making a living for yourself. You live off of everybody else, and you do that for a very long time. Are you participating? Are you building your society? It's obviously a debate about each individual person, but I think it's a discussion that we could possibly have.
Yeah, and I think that it is interesting to make a tie into, if we continue to push this back, meaning this age of majority where someone truly becomes responsible for themselves, are we enabling them to just continue to live off other people? It's like, oh, I can be on my parents' insurance till I'm 26 now, so why move on? And we see a lot of changes taking place in society where people are getting married later, they're getting married less. And to me, I'm always asking, does the law play into that? And to what extent does the law play into that? But I really like the idea of saying, yeah, if voting is a privilege or a right, this right and privilege we have in America, what's the responsibility associated with it? And I would say, at a minimum, before you go vote, I think you should have to read everyone's website that you're voting on. Just, yeah, check them out. Why not? If you haven't even looked at the websites of candidates who have websites, and granted, it's interesting because this does go both ways. I've seen some candidates that I can't find their website for the life of me. Can't find anything about them online other than whatever news articles ran. And so, I don't know. It's one where we do have to talk about responsibility, but it does surprise me how many people vote without reading candidates' websites, or at least looking at them to say what's good or bad. They're just going off of party affiliation or whatnot. And maybe that's okay, but to me, it feels wrong. It doesn't feel like a great option to say, yeah, we're going to maintain a country, we're going to maintain our freedoms. It'll be through voting of a bunch of people that don't really know what they're voting for. They just want more money here, or they want this, or they want that. And I think my concern with moving the voting age, to me, instead of moving the voting age, we probably should have moved the draft age. Just said 18 is pretty young to send people away to fight. Let's just change the draft age to 21 rather than move the voting age. But we went the other way. And, we have issues in society where there are groups working to lower the age of consent for children on sexual related things. And, we've held decently strongly to a 18-year-old. You're not supposed to have sexual relations there if you're older than 18 and younger than 18. That obviously produces some unique scenarios. And the big elephant in the room is that, well, a 17-year-old can consent with a 17-year-old. And we respect that legally, but not with an 18-year-old or not with a 19-year-old. And I'm not here advocating that people should be allowed to sleep around. That's not what I'm talking about at all. To me, it's this notion, kind of what you're talking about, of let's not pick and choose when a kid can or can't consent. Just say kids shouldn't be sleeping around. It's not something they consent to. We've already determined they can't consent to that with an adult. They don't consent to it either with kids. Let's just not go there. Let's not support it. Let's not actively push it, talk about it. To me, it should be very fine to say, yep, kids and sexuality don't mix, just like kids and tobacco don't mix, kids and alcohol don't mix. Even adults and alcohol don't mix. If you're 20, we're still saying no. And we know that things can be so addictive and have such an impact on people's lives that we don't allow it. And I look at, from a moral perspective, just things related to sexuality and consent and say that stuff can really mess people up too for their whole life. And it amazes me that we talk so much about comprehensive sexual education. Oh, the kids are just going to do it, so we just got to help them do it. Like, well, what, kids are just going to drink, so we just got to help them drink. No, let's push a healthy life. Let's let them grow up without these things in their life for a time, and then enable them to be better equipped to make choices later. That's the whole premise of alcohol and tobacco, is let them grow up without addiction to it. And I say the same for things like sexuality. Something you become addicted to. Pornography can radically change you. We're learning, there's a lot of evidence coming out about social media changing children, which is leading states to say, oh, no social media. And I say, okay, but why don't we talk about the fact that kids are still sleeping with each other? And what harms are actually greater? Which ones are more significant? If a girl gets pregnant as a teen and the rate of depression is crazy high, whether they carry the child to term, whether they adopt the child out, whether they have an abortion, it's a significant impact on that mother and can have a significant impact on her whole life. And these are matters that, interestingly, are, we talk about equality and people's sexuality, let them sleep around, do what they want. But by nature, meaning just what nature's put out, there's a very different impact to women than there is to men in these types of things. And nature changes a woman's body, goes through a lot of things. That's why when people push for abortion, it's because they feel it helps them have a little bit more, equality or whatever as it comes to experiencing things like that. But I look at it and say, we're trying to help women become more free. And we want to help them become more equal. And just fully embracing this sexual narrative is not a way to do it. It's not how we get there. If we want equality, we need to stop objectification. We need to stop teaching children about sexuality so much. Give them a life without it for a time. As a world, I strongly believe that we'll be far better off if we work to give our kids a place, again, free from tobacco, free from drugs, free from alcohol, and free from sexuality. Let them grow up in that. Let them have that. And again, people may laugh and say, oh, there's no way. But there is. Societies have pushed it, worked on it for a long time. Maybe they haven't been perfect. There's obviously kids that will experiment with drugs or alcohol. They'll experiment with certain things. But as a society, we can do so much. And that can radically impact future generations. And this is one where I'm not necessarily saying the law has to step in on everything here, because we certainly have a moral responsibility. And we're going to get into the moral responsibility side of things more in future episodes. But this is one that, to me, we bring up because of this age issue and voting and saying, oh, you have a right to vote at 18. Every right has a responsibility with it. So you could also view it as you have the responsibility associated with voting at 18. And if we're going to hand out rights and responsibilities, we have to have the moral discussion. We have to talk about, what does that mean? I don't believe we can fully understand what that means until we see what other rights and responsibilities we're sticking on people at these ages. Again, this is why we talk about these issues, just to say, okay, so you can go sleep around with 16-year-olds if you're 16. And you can drive, but no, you can't do that with an 18-year-old. And you got to wait till you're 18 to vote. You got to wait till you're 21 to try tobacco. And to me, is to say, let us not sit here and piece together different things, because I think what happens when we don't follow principles and it's just kind of willy-nilly all over the place, the respect for law breaks down. Then it's just about power. Someone in power said something. There's no rhyme or reason to it. There's nothing important to follow. And when you don't have respect for the law, the whole system starts to break down. And this is something we should go into more in other episodes to talk about. The actual basis of the American legal system and the Constitution is a system of respect. If we lose respect for the law, the whole system will break down here in America. And when the law deviates from principles and just picks and chooses, oh, yep, this age here, that age there, oh, we'll try you as an adult today, but yep, you're still juvenile. It's a contributing factor. I'm not saying it alone will collapse the system. Obviously, our system's operated for quite a while. But I think the more we start to play with ages and the more arbitrary it becomes, the more it starts to feel there's no purpose other than someone's trying to control my life. And we get very upset at that and work to resist that as a people, when there's no rhyme or reason or principle. And kids always ask why. It's a good thing to ask. Clients ask me why. Why is this the law? And if the answer is just there's no rhyme or reason, it just is what it is, it never produces peace, or it doesn't produce patriotism. It doesn't produce a sense of loyalty to the system. It's then just kind of a free for all of, well, who can get the most people in power? And we see that again playing out in politics, where as the divide deepens and people get more angry at each other and we start fighting more and more because we feel that it truly is a fight for our liberty. We feel the other side wants to take away certain things from us. And so we have to fight. And one reason we feel that way is because the law is kind of not principled anymore. It's just who's ever in power, and it's whatever they say. And so those battles get fiercer and they get more serious. And I believe strongly that if we return law to a system of principles that are followed, the political battles and the divisiveness go down, because then we're following principle. It's not just a matter of who passed what law and who got what bill through. And that's why we talk about these things and bring up these ancillary or tangential type principles associated with it, because the law is precedential in nature. Once something exists, we then look to it for other things, and it builds. And so we have the battle playing out with youth and social media. We have battles playing out about porn companies having to require ID before someone accesses the porn site, just like they have to with tobacco or alcohol. All kinds of things in the air associated with age. And to me, say, let's get some solid principles and talk about law as a principle. There should be an age of majority, like you say, Michael, where you're there and you're responsible now. And when we, again, pick and choose, it really starts to deviate from that and contributes to this breakdown of respect for law. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that, though, Michael, or anything you want to add.
Just one other thing on when we talk about children and kind of the principle around raising them and our goal for them. We like to talk about with children that we want them to be in a situation where they can fail and recover quickly, like a soft fail, right? When you have children, you want them to experience a lot of things and make mistakes because you want them to learn from it. And the landing for those mistakes, we want it to be soft. They rebound quickly and they get up and they learn and they try again. And with these ages of consent or ages to do certain things, we've tried to push off, just principally speaking, things that naturally don't have a soft fail. So we talk about alcohol, tobacco, pornography, sexual relationships. These things don't typically have soft failures. They're very hard and they can last the rest of your life depending on how you handle them. And so it seems funny to say, pick a different age all over the place for these things that are pretty serious and can have long lasting impacts. And if we look at it principally and say, what can we do for our children, make sure they learn and grow and rebound quickly from failures, which they'll inevitably have? Well, it's probably to keep away things that don't have a soft landing, that have long lasting impacts. And again, this isn't just an encouragement for law to come into place. It's also the way we should look at it as families, as communities, as societies, and say, what do we do? We like to say, oh, children will be children when they make mistakes. And that's great for the little mistakes that have the soft failures. But if it's something serious, that mistake could last for the rest of their life. And we know that even as adults, it's hard to see the end from the beginning, but especially for children, they just have no idea about consequences. And so we should do a better job of creating environments where our children can fail and recover quickly and not be bound to a failure for the rest of their life. And I think we can do that in our societies, and we can do a better job of that legally as well.
Yeah, and I like how you talk about the soft landing versus the hard landing. Another one that's ravaging people's lives, children, you talk about sexting, and that alone, some of those images get out and it can destroy people for a crazy long time. These aren't just harmless little things that are being played with and whatever. And again, I'm not here articulating that the law should solve all these problems. The law is wholly incapable of solving all problems. That's why the founders chose to say, we don't want tyranny, because it doesn't solve all the problems. It just creates more once it gets to a certain level. And I see more and more where something bad happens and people come out and say, oh, the law needs to be changed. We need to be doing something about this. I saw today, for example, a situation where a student at a high school here in Utah brought some kind of technological jamming device to class. And he could stop the teacher's computer from working. He could stop kids' cell phones from connecting, whatever. And the large consensus among most of the commentators anyways was that the government needed to ban this device, and because it could do these things. And some people pointed out, they said, well, you can go on Amazon and buy lockpicks. Why aren't lockpicks banned? And there were some people though that talked about this technology and just said, look, it's super simple to make. You can't stop them from existing. We know how to do it. The knowledge is out there. And the law is it's not possible to stop someone from jamming someone else's signal. You can make it illegal, sure, but that doesn't stop it from happening. And so we have many situations where the law doesn't solve the problem necessarily. The law may impose consequences, but we can't turn to the law for everything. We can't look to the law to save us from everything. And so moving forward from here in our discussions, we have one more amendment before we get through all of them in the Constitution, all 27 amendments. And it's a decently simple amendment too in its concept, but there are some bigger principles to talk about with checks and balances and things. But it also leads greatly into a discussion about moral responsibility. And we really want to do a deep dive into some of the morals associated with this balance. We talk about a balance. We talk about law pulling us out of anarchy. So if anarchy's here and we're trying to get out of it, law has to exist to create some rules to pull us out of anarchy, but the morality has to exist on the other side of the balance. And America is amazing not only because of law, but because it put law in, but it rested on a moral basis. And we want to talk about that and look at those things. And so this segment serves as kind of a lead into some of that. Next podcast segment will serve to lead more into it. And then we're going to launch into really trying to do a deep dive to say, this is morality. This is what we as a people can do. These are some of the principles that we have to live by in order to maintain our liberties and to maintain America as the country it is. We don't live in a country where one elected leader can save us. And I'll throw that out right now. I personally I'm running for Attorney General of Utah. I can't save Utah. I can't save the people here. Trump, like a lot of his supporters like to talk about how he's the person that can save Utah. He can't, or save America. He can't save America. The system's not built that way. It's built that we each have responsibilities. We have to do our part. No one person can save us. Now, people can make a difference. They can have an influence. They can speed things up, slow things down. But at the end of the day, we as the people have the ultimate responsibility, and it rests with us. And if we are in the mindset that we're going to elect someone that's going to save us or save our country, we have gone far astray from correct legal principles. That's not how America works. And so we will explore that moral foundation in a much stronger basis as we continue on with these episodes. Michael, anything you want to wrap up with before we conclude for the day?
Nope. Just excited to start talking more about moral principles behind the founding of America. I think that balance we've hit on it a little bit as we talked through, but we've talked a lot about law and its trend towards tyranny, and it'll be good to talk about morals and how we can kind of pull back on that a little bit and provide the right balance for liberty.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us for this episode. We look forward to following up with you again and appreciate you joining.